break the faith, fall from grace, tell me lies, time flies, close your eyes, come with me. Right? That was my version, right? He go, hear my cries, hear my calls, let me hear, see my faults, see my errors, know my faults, time halts, see my loss, know I'm like, I'd be like, bro, that is not what I said.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we're discussing 50 Cent's new documentary on Netflix. This is a very tightly crafted, well-timed, and damning documentary about the life and crimes of Sean Combs. The 4-part series examines Sean's legacy from the start of his career to his trials that reshaped his legacy. Although the documentary is jam-packed and it speeds through time, it successfully annihilates his character. It essentially depicts him as the Pennywise of the music industry, a man who turns dreams into nightmares. The series retraces the trail of violence and devastation it associates with his rise, arguing he may be connected not only to the accusations already known, but to even more that remain unexamined. It paints a portrait of a man that was willing to do anything to make sure that he was the center of the universe, no matter who he had to sacrifice along the way. The documentary opens with a scene of Diddy on the phone with his lawyer, discussing concerns about his public image and the need to bring in a media strategist experienced in the darker corners of the industry to shape the context that a non-sequestered jury might absorb outside of the court. Because the public was unable to actually see the trial, Diddy's team was very concerned with not only maintaining Diddy's public perception, also shaping the jury's perception of reality when they left the courthouse and logged onto TikTok every night. Personally, as someone who followed the trial, the whole thing felt very staged. Because the jury was not sequestered, it was very easy for Diddy's team to create a narrative that the jury could easily access outside of the courtroom. And I think Diddy's influence and his ability to get to people either directly or indirectly explains why the jury was reluctant to hold him fully accountable for his actions. One of the jury members interviewed in the documentary mentioned how she knew that other people were scrolling on social media but not her, and I just had to roll my eyes at that. Every single one of those jury members logged on to every social media platform to see what was going on, and this very much affected their decision. And I do think Diddy's team was quite successful in constantly embedding naysayers regarding what was happening inside of the courtroom and casting doubt as to Diddy's guilt, especially if the jury was watching endless commentary. There was always someone on these commentary channels defending Diddy, and this was by design. Watching Diddy take selfies around New York, bike through the city, and then climb into his car complaining that he'd been around regular people.
I've been out in the streets amongst the people. Yeah, I gotta take a bath.
Really sums up his character. This documentary was definitely aimed at the Free Diddy crowd. Diddy does not care about you. He never cared about the people who made him rich. So please stop caring about him. The first half of the documentary does a great job of unpacking Diddy's villain origin story, as well as highlighting how abusive and predatory the music industry is. Diddy built his empire on a foundation that already existed. His downfall exposed and confirmed what we've long known about the music industry, a space that has often served as a safe haven for very exploitative people. The series divides its time between revisiting Diddy's past and observing Diddy in the future, calling his accusers broke.
What level of brokenness, disease is going on?
And just obsessed with coming up with strategies to win this trial. And not just win this trial, but win this trial in a way that maintains his public image and will enable him to continue on in his career. The documentary does a great job of exploring Diddy's childhood and explaining how a lot of these early experiences really shaped his adulthood, showing how he frequently honed and refined practices others had taught him. Diddy grew up in a very unstable environment, and the documentary never excuses his behavior. The white parties were merely an extension of the crazy parties his mother would throw when he was a child. The idea to record his victims and play the video at parties came from a local gangster in the neighborhood that he idolized. And the documentary really paints a picture of a man that's never had an original thought in his entire life. He either builds on his past experiences or steals what he's observed in others. On top of that, he pedestalized and idolized his father as a very dangerous gangster, and he tried to build himself up in the same way by surrounding himself with people he could exert extreme violence on. The documentary does a great job of outlining a pattern of exploitation and predatory behavior. Watching a lot of these clips back, again, it's been a while since I've revisited Diddy's music, and I was cringing not so much at his music, but a lot of his performances have not aged well. And something that comes up repeatedly from everyone interviewed is how charismatic and charming he is when they first meet him. Like, he has this energy that they kind of get sucked into. He had a way of getting into proximity with extremely powerful people and, like a virus, take hold, disrupting, consuming, and reshaping their businesses to become his own. The music industry has always been riddled with abuse and mistreatment. Diddy is not just one bad apple. He's just one of many bad apples in a very rotten tree. I also appreciated how the documentary demonstrated the tension between art and business. People operating these labels were more concerned with maintaining and hoarding their wealth than creating great music or taking care of their artists. Towards the end of the documentary, Little Rod mentions that in order to make it in the industry, you do have to go through certain gatekeepers like Diddy. And as time has gone by, it's become easier to avoid these gatekeepers, but still incredibly difficult. Diddy is famous for cheating his artists. A lot of the footage we're getting is because he just refused to pay the people around him. And a lot of these predatory practices are things he picked up from his former mentors like Andre Harrell and Clive Davis. And Diddy has always been a suit. And as much as he always wanted to become a star, he's seen firsthand how a lot of these artists end up with the short end of the stick. And so early on in his career, he was very much concerned with having his cake and eating it too. I thought the editing and the musical choices of this series were absolutely diabolical, but did a great job of really emphasizing certain points. The series suggests far more than it states outright. It lets you read between the lines. It also often uses photos and archival footage to redirect attention to the people who were around Diddy and spent a lot of time with Diddy, implying that they too also need their own deep dive and their own expose. And the documentary mentioned that Diddy lived with Andre early in his career. My ears immediately perked up, and the editing really didn't help. From the very beginning of his career, when he pursued Kim knowing she had a boyfriend, Diddy really showed that he had absolutely no shame and this unwavering audacity. And it felt like there was nothing he wouldn't do if it meant advancing his career. There is no truly collaborative way to work with Diddy. Eventually, you either end up working under him or you end up getting erased. What gives this series a lot of credibility are the interviews. It interviews a number of people who know him very well, people who have grown up with him, and people who have helped him build the foundation of his empire. Listening to a lot of his childhood friends and former business associates describe how they slowly came to terms to see what he has always been, you can tell that they were very much still traumatized by their experiences, and some of them really did feel like they were still afraid of him as well. One of the jury members interviewed in the series mentioned how she doubted Capricorn Clark's testimony, like the whole thing seemed very far-fetched, and she describes being kidnapped by Diddy. And so the jury really questioned the authenticity of this story. However, considering Diddy's life even before he was famous, what Capricorn Clark was describing was very consistent with his behavior. And I think one of the reasons the jury had a hard time is because there's such a stark discrepancy between how he presents himself in the public and who he really is behind the scenes. At the end of the documentary, Kirk Burroughs, one of the founding members of Bad Boy, explains how Diddy used to sexually violate him as well as other people around him. And this again speaks to just how large that gap is between his public and private persona. These are not one-off incidences. Everything about Diddy is chronic, and it's been ongoing since the start of his career. Even before Little Rod, he had artists nominated for Grammys who could not pay their bill. And his strategy was very much to seduce and scheme. Once he's extracted the best out of you, he discards you and leaves you to die. I mean, this man has no loyalty to anyone or anything. In fact, he used a lot of the money that these artists were making him to humiliate and control them. Even listening to Capricorn Clark, I mean, the way he would promote people to the highest levels of his company only to throw them away, knowing that they really had no recourse outside of him to even fight back. And as the documentary goes on, you get a picture of not just like Diddy's company, but almost this cult that he was able to create to keep people very loyal and coerce them into things they just did not want to do. One of the jury members mentioned how she was a fan of his music, and it is true that Diddy is connected to some of the greatest tracks of all time. However, once you peer behind the curtains, you realize that he uses a lot of this music and a lot of these artists to give him enough legitimacy, not just to rob them, but to convince their fans that he was essential to their success and the success of anyone like him. And I think celebrity worship very much played a role in this trial. You could see his influence with every single person interviewed in this documentary, how in awe they were of him, how much they admired him until they saw who he really was. One of the most frustrating interviews that stood out to me was with Kalina Harper from Dirty Money. And I was really trying to give her the benefit of the doubt, but it was extremely difficult. She defends Diddy even though this man has done very little to help her. She describes a situation where she actually called him for some, like she needed money because she was in this very bitter custody battle, I think with her, the father of her children, and he just refused. She still went to bat for him, and you do have to wonder what he has on them or how much he offered her to just lie like that. And the documentary is riddled with recordings of Diddy self-incriminating, and the whole thing is so shameless and out in the open, and he really doesn't care if he's caught, and he has this way of speaking that makes you forget about all the horrible things that he's done to the people he's speaking to. Because the documentary covers such a large span of history, it doesn't really go through every moment in detail. Instead, it assumes that you have some base knowledge of who Diddy is and what the allegations are, especially considering the number of documentaries that have come out in the last year or two. However, if you're already familiar with Diddy and this era of music, the series does add meaningful context and new information to what you already know. For example, the series dedicates a chunk of time to Diddy's relationship with Biggie and his alleged involvement in Tupac and Biggie's death. It paints a very damning portrait of a petty young man sandwiched between two superstars. The documentary also includes audio recordings of a man named Keefe D, who will stand trial for Tupac's murder, and he describes in detail that Diddy was the one responsible for ordering the hit. The series does a wonderful job of laying out a timeline of extremely suspicious events, especially with regards to Biggie. The most damning being that Diddy did not want Biggie to leave LA and even forced him to come to LA for an award show, despite tensions being extremely high following Tupac's death. And something about the way these clips are arranged, you do get a sense that Diddy really enjoyed watching Biggie humiliated on stage and booed. I mean, watching Diddy, he was unbothered because he knows that he is not the focus of attention. However, looking back, he's very much the focus of attention. Besides Biggie, Diddy seems to have like this pattern regarding the artists he signs where they either just fall off the rails, they die, or they just disappear. I also thought the interviews with the LAPD officer, as well as former gang members, helped give a lot of the allegations in this documentary a lot of credibility, especially regarding how Diddy was able to network with really dangerous people and get them to do what he wanted. And one thing is for sure when it comes to Diddy, even when you look at the verdict, he is an expert at covering his tracks or getting other people to cover them for him. Diddy's involvement in Tupac and Biggie's death has long been this open secret. It's something that everybody knows, but no one really knows what to do about. According to the LAPD officer who was assigned to the cold case, Diddy was a hindrance from the very beginning, even though publicly he was acting as though he had lost his brother. Biggie's career gave Diddy significant legitimacy, and his death propelled him to superstardom. Unlike a lot of the artists he worked with early in his career, like Mary J. Blige, Diddy does not have the same level of charisma and talent as they do. It also didn't help that his biggest act, Biggie, was becoming very close to his biggest rival, Tupac. And if this friendship was allowed to blossom, Diddy would be left out in the cold. The documentary suggests that Diddy essentially destiny swapped with Biggie, taking his Rolling Stones cover and using his death to aggressively promote his career, and allegedly draining Biggie's estate for everything that it was worth. On the surface, Diddy did this fantastic job of presenting himself as this devoted friend. However, behind the scenes, he was maneuvering to change contracts in his favor. He even used Biggie's estate to pay for the funeral, and this paints such a damning picture. I mean, this man has never had an ounce of empathy. Like, he has nothing inside of him.
Are you one of those institutionalized raised guys? Anybody home? And the standard parts that are supposed to be there when people in you aren't.
And this was one hell of a revelation. The documentary forces you to rethink everything you've seen from Diddy, whether it be performing on stage, honoring someone whose funeral he refused to pay for, or shaking hands and taking selfies in New York. I mean, everything from the very beginning was extremely performative and very disingenuous. Rewatching the clips with this new context in mind, Diddy was a bit too upbeat to be the center of attention. I mean, he was soaking it up like a sponge. He was able to successfully use Biggie's death to just stay at the top. Once he became a star, his only priority was just keeping himself there. And again, rewatching a lot of these clips, watching him on stage perform music that he was clearly ill-equipped to perform, watching him twirl about aimlessly, like, I don't know how he got away with this or why no one thought, like, this is a bit odd. You could see how badly he wanted the spotlight. Biggie's talent was too big, too commanding, and the documentary implies that Diddy never wanted to cultivate an artist that could outshine him, outleverage him, or at least leave his orbit without his permission. And I think the way the series establishes this timeline by talking to different people he's abused and discarded along the way really shows you how he's perfected this formula for coercing and manipulating people into doing what he wants. And his main method was really selling himself. I mean, like, he was his most valuable product. No one could pitch Diddy better than Diddy. As the years go on, the industry is changing, and gatekeepers like Diddy are not as influential as, say, gatekeepers in the past like Clive Davis. This early context is really helpful because trying to manipulate artists who have had some experience in the music industry is very difficult. However, trying to manipulate an artist who knows nothing about the industry is a whole other ballgame. Now, knowing what we know about reality TV show, a lot of what Diddy was doing was probably not uncommon. And reality TV was the perfect breeding ground for him to indoctrinate and normalize a lot of the perverse behavior he was doing already. All the ridiculous stunts he would make them do, the contracts they would blindly sign, none of it was really geared to creating an artist. A lot of it was just geared to creating slaves he could use and discard. People in this documentary literally admitted to signing contracts they knew were terrible because...
Definitely signed it. It's bad boy.
And I think it shows how ignorant the public is regarding the entertainment industry. A lot of our favorite artists don't actually own their own music. Executives like Diddy are able to exploit the emotional impact of a lot of these songs in order to mislead people. At the end of the day, a Grammy and an Oscar mean absolutely nothing if you're not being paid for the work that earned it. Out of all the people interviewed, one of the most devastating was that of Aubrey O'Day. And one thing I appreciated about this documentary is that it's never salacious. It slowly builds up to a lot of these devastating revelations regarding Diddy and just how deviant he was. Aubrey realized early on that this man was a grade A creep, and growing up her mother told her that she should be a lawyer, and I can see why. She has great instinct and she's very tough. And although she was also seduced by all the things that Diddy was promising, Diddy was not able to really sink his hooks into her as deeply as he could with others. I thought the letter she received at the end was absolutely devastating, and again really establishes this pattern. A lot of the people assaulted by Diddy don't actually even remember it happening. They're told later on. What's so scary about Diddy is by the time you realize you're being groomed, even if you know that something is wrong, by the time you feel brave enough to do something about it, he's already exploited you. And when you think about the Cassie video, it's a miracle that that video exists at all. And this was the only real glimpse we get into the true Diddy, just the true face of Diddy, like who he really is. Diddy's public image was so clean. And then learning that he was this drug-addicted maniac who participated in freak-offs, I mean, it's just so mind-boggling. Now, the documentary does briefly cover Cassie and Diddy's relationship through an interview with a male escort. And it's through him we start to understand the dynamics of their relationship, as well as what exactly these freak-offs are, these intense drug-fueled parties that went on for days. The male escort describes a years-long relationship with Cassie and Diddy in which he witnessed all kinds of depravity. The most striking is on the day of Biggie's death, he says that Diddy would always call him out to party and to freak off. And I do think a lot of his description, especially what he witnessed between Diddy and Cassie, really does a good job of building up to Little Rod's interview and painting this picture of a man who was always in control and knew exactly what he was doing. During his time with Diddy and Cassie, he basically describes her as completely obedient to him. If she showed any signs of resistance, he would immediately lash out in this fit of rage. Cassie, like a lot of the people around him, had absolutely no power or leverage over him. He signed her at the very start of what could have been a promising career and then essentially suffocated that career and made sure it never took off. And I thought the documentary did a good job of contrasting Kim and Cassie. With Kim, he could maintain this fake public image. However, with Cassie, he was able to mold and shape her into exactly what he wanted. He consistently surrounded himself with people who lacked the influence to ever challenge him. He could have hired anyone to produce his last album. I mean, this man is well connected. Instead, he hires a producer that, although talented, really had little sway and, more importantly, was completely starstruck and worshipped him in some way. The footage that Little Rod provided was extremely crucial. Now, why Diddy consistently hired people to record him and just never pay them is something that needs that needs its own documentary.
I can only compare myself to the Son of God. You feel me?
This footage gives us a glimpse into this very toxic work environment. Diddy began working with Little Rod the same way he begins working with everyone. He love bombs them. He kind of brings them into his world, and then he starts grooming and controlling them. Little Rod describes not even going home for 2 years. Like, the amount of time he spent with Diddy was abnormal. Like, he was very much a part of his world. Diddy has this way of creating this cult-like atmosphere. Once you're in his world, he really just doesn't let you go until he gets everything he wants out of you. And one of the strategies he would consistently use is promising you the world. He told Little Rod he would give him $250K, a house next door. And for Little Rod, I mean, there was no reason to doubt him. He's in his house, he's in his world, there's no boundaries between them. Diddy invites Little Rod in as if he's family. And so Little Rod, as a result, is naive enough to trust him. Now, Little Rod got to know Diddy on a very personal level. I mean, he spent time with his sons, he was in his house. And the documentary is clever never to directly scrutinize his children. However, the impression we get of his sons is that they're more like loyal minions rather than heirs to his fortune. Every time you see his sons in the documentary, they're kind of waiting on him hand and foot. And Little Rod's interview towards the end was quite heartbreaking because you can see the hope in his eyes when he first started working with Diddy. Like, he's like, I'm gonna retire my family. And there was just a lot, there was just a lot of pressure on this album for him. In his interview, Little Rod describes being drugged repeatedly and not really knowing what was happening to him. Sometimes he would wake up with women next to him. Sometimes he would wake up with Diddy right next to him. And as soon as the album was finished, Little Rod was completely set aside. I mean, he was cast out of Diddy's orbit. Not only was he not compensated, Diddy would repeatedly call him, whispering sweet nothings into his ear, suggesting that their friendship outweighed his obligation to pay him. And Little Rod's experience is very on brand. For Diddy, money meant power. He finds someone that he can easily groom to work with. And once the work is done, he throws them out knowing that they have limited resources to come back at him. And throughout his career, Diddy has successfully managed to avoid accountability by simply throwing money at the problem. He hires the best lawyers, the best PR team, people very skilled at crafting a narrative that enables him to slip through the cracks time and time again. Now, even though he was found guilty on some of the charges, he's only serving 4 years, and that's assuming that he serves the full 4 years. And because of the RICO, he is able to maintain his fortune. I think the documentary is effective in that it dismantles this carefully crafted image of him. It's one thing to be intimidating and dangerous. It's another thing to be completely talentless and disloyal. It also strips him of any cultural significance, undermining the notion that this is a man worth aspiring to become. If anything, the documentary advocates for keeping him internally infamous as the poster child for everything wrong with the music industry. And so there was a lot in this documentary, and I think, again, the goal of the documentary was to really annihilate his character and break this facade. And I think it did a great job of doing that. So if you've seen it, let me know, and until next time.